we don't fundamentally need debt. This is that debt is contractual again, and we are all. It sounds mad. I'm not mad, even though people think I'm mad. I'm not. I'm actually very realistic and pragmatist. Fortunately, I've been successful in my life because I'm a pragmatist. But this is real. We are all told that you need debt, and debt is part of society. You don't. The answer is you don't need debt. And in the biblical model, debt is waived every 7 years.
Philip, you've described our society as broken, and you've said that there's 5 areas that need urgent reform, and you've called them the 5 masters, which is the name of this series. I think to bang home to us that we are in a state of servitude to them, and you think that's wrong. And I'd just like to list them. They are the state, the markets, technology, money, which includes banking, and land, meaning landlords, landowners. I'd like to start off with land. Philip, what do you think's gone wrong with our approach to land?
Let's talk specifically about housing, which is one of the main areas that involve the land. The house has become an asset. It's become financialized. In many cases, husband and wife both have to earn a big mortgage in order to afford to pay for a vastly inflated price. So it's effectively become a burden. People are living in fear of losing their houses. And effectively, and the same would apply if people rent, whether it's an owned house with a huge mortgage or a rented, it's precarious ownership. People don't know that they're going to be able to live in the house, especially now with interest rates where they are, in the next 6 months of the next year. And that is, it's disgraceful. And people are suffering. And so we've effectively lost the focus on what a house is. It's a place to have a loving relationship with the family. Because it's so financialized, it's contractual, and it's lost its covenantal purpose.
Morris, you wrote in your book, nature is not a commodity, but a condition of life and a sacred inheritance. How do you think it came to be treated like a commodity?
Well, that's a huge story about modernity. Obviously, for a vast majority of human history, if you said to people that the free market created the world, they'd look at you askance, but that's become the modern orthodoxy because people thought that, God created the world and that was an inheritance. But that passed, and then that was particularly important in the beginning of, in the 17th century, really, in our country through enclosures was very good, is the freehold title subordinated all other titles. So people claimed an absolute ownership of the earth. And this goes back to Philip's point that he was said about housing is to live. We are embodied beings, we're not abstract beings. We need somewhere to live. We're relational beings. We need a home. So a home is something different from an asset. It's a necessity of human existence and the reproduction of human existence. So essentially, if a central aspect of capitalism is this claim about the inviolability of private property rights. And this became really established in the 17th century and within our legal system. So essentially, human needs were subordinated to a market system whereby your wealth was dependent on buying and selling your home. So that's the beginning of an answer, but I'm willing to go further.
No, that's super interesting. So for people who are lucky enough to have a house, it's considered an asset, a kind of frozen bank balance. But there's lots of people. In fact, I was surprised to read that 1 in 5 in England actually rent in the private rental sector, which is vast. It's gone up hugely in the last 20 years. So we have a real crisis developing there in with rentals, both in the private rental sector and in the social rental sector. what do we do? We've got rents going up almost faster than inflation. We've got, add into that the cost of living crisis. And no wonder you've got this perfect storm where more and more people are turning to food banks, people who never thought they would have to turn to food banks. Destitution is also exploding. What's the answer? Is it to build more houses? Is it to put a rent cap on? What should we be doing about this?
Okay, for me, I'm clear on this. For starts, rent, I go with the classical economists who hold that it's unearned income, as is interest, and it's gluttonous. We don't want a rental sector, period. It's dangerous, and it actually is damaging. So we want people not to worry about. So people having second or third homes, no, let someone have their first home. Forget about you having second or third homes and being a landlord, because that's not what we need. Effectively, the land was given to all of us by God, effectively, and therefore, why should I buy more than what I need, 4 or 5 houses, and rent them, and then control other people? It's again, master slave is contractual. It's not covenantal. That's why the 5 masters are all examples of relationships that that are no longer covenantal. So how do you sort it out? So rental goes because that's fundamentally abusive. So what we're left with is helping people to actually own houses. And then to resolve that, I think the problem is clearly a banking problem. At the heart of this problem is the fact that banks actually create money. I can explain it in detail, but that's the way it is. Banks actually create money, and they have the choice of what they do with that money. And banks have chosen to not go with a covenantal model, which is actually looking after people and employment. They've actually used the money for assets, for contractual relationships, and therefore we've had this massive bubble where house prices are crazy. So we all think we're happy. I've got a house worth £300,000, but you've got debt alongside it. All they've done is created a bubble which is going to burst. But fortunately, there's a positive outcome that will come out of it. So we need to look at that as a fundamental problem. And it can be resolved. We have to change the way banks operate. We don't fundamentally need debt. This is that debt is contractual again. And we are all, it sounds mad. I'm not mad, even though people think I'm mad. I'm not. I'm actually very realistic and pragmatist. Fortunately, I've been successful in my life because I'm a pragmatist. But this is real. We are all told that you need debt, and debt is part of society. You don't. The answer is you don't need debt. And in the biblical model, debt is waived every 7 years, and it's real. So the trouble we've got is that we allow the banks to create money. This is the reality of the situation. We think we live in the free market. We don't. Banks actually can do whatever they like. They can create money. No one's telling them what to do. And they're using it to pump up asset prices, which is houses, financial assets, consumer price inflation. So banks are literally planning and using the money for their own ends. And that is resulting in inflation and in massive mortgages. So the model that we need to move towards is a model where we actually move away from a mortgage-based system. We have debt forgiveness built into the system. We have a cyclical model that actually allows debt to be waived every 7 years. It doesn't cause inflation because it's a book entry. I can explain that again probably a bit later. But fundamentally, there's a real option of not having mortgages, and people don't need to live in, and people have stopped thinking about it. But it's real, and it's the way we need to move forward.
But that's revolutionary speak, if you like. I mean, are people going to voluntarily give up their assets? The ones who are lucky enough to have houses in the first place, who worked hard to get them, who feel like they deserve them, feel like that they deserve what they're worth today in today's market. Are people going to give that up?
They're not giving them up. I'm saying they keep their asset. They just don't have the mortgage. No, they're not giving it up. The person with the family gets the asset. It's the debt that's waived, not the asset. They retain ownership, and fundamentally,
but not of a second house or a third place.
Correct. In the end, people need to be. If I'm only 2 or 3 houses and I've got tenants, they are insecure. They need the same. Why can't they have the same security as you? So no, you effectively you have a home to live with your family. And that is what you do. And then you do a job which is productive, which creates things other people need. Whether it's developing scientific drugs or hospitals or schools or education. You do something which society needs. But to have a second or third property, is actually just gluttonous. You don't need it, and effectively that is what I'm saying. That the first house, of course, you have that free of any mortgage. The mortgage get waived every 7 years, and it's real. It's happened. It can happen.
This point about property ownership
Right.
is you know, there are huge property owners, the Duke of Westminster, for example, who control massive swathes of our property. I think what Philip's talking about is a much more decentralised system relating to land reform. So, you know, for example, if 20% of the Duke of Westminster's property was endowed towards community land trusts, the reality is that between half and 2/3 of the price of the property is actually the price of the land, not the price of the building on the land. So if that was transferred to the community, then we could build houses for people to live in, the houses that they want to live in, and that. So what we're talking about really is a land reform. So that there is a redistribution of assets to people, that people are part of, you know, society in that way.